Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brad Johnson. I'm the Director of Engagement for publicinput.com. We have TJ McCourt here with us this afternoon from the City of Raleigh.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here. Looking forward to the discussion.
First, just want to talk about what we mean when we talk about a relevant project. And when we're talking about a relevant project, we're talking about whether or not it is something that people can easily access. And it's something that they feel like they can actually intersect with, but also sort of just the number of residents affected, the degree to which somebody actually identifies with it in their community, and also how polarizing it might be. Sometimes in this work, we get a little scared of polarizing topics, but there's ways to leverage those things. So when we've worked with agencies, we sort of find that a lot of times professionals will think of participation like this, where there's lots of interest on one end of the spectrum and no interest on the other end. And it looks, most people on that no interest spectrum, nobody's all that excited about it. We don't find this graph to be the case. We find that the engagement curve actually looks more like this, where you still have your frequent flyers. We're never going to necessarily eliminate those, but there's a lot of folks in the middle who, with the right issue, with the right topic, with the right approach, would be really interested and motivated to engage. So an example of that is dogs. People have dogs, they're interested in dog stuff, they engage that way. Or there's a playground in someone's neighborhood. These are the types of things that get people sort of moving in the right direction. We can use that relevance to really begin building a core of engagement. And the second assumption that we have is that we sort of assume that as we get more people, that our pain is going to increase. And what we find is that for the most part, this is the way that things are happening. The more people you get involved, the more people who are thoughtful and considerate. And so the more engagement we find actually moves the needle from sort of this extreme sort of frequent flyer-based engagement to actually a much more constructive conversation about how to actually address the challenges that we face. So there's sort of two ways to increase relevance. One is to build a more accessible process, and second is to sort of focus around topics of interest that people have. The ways to sort of build a more accessible process are just to really begin to look at your toolkit, to look at the things that are available to you, to think of things in a multilingual way, to use social media in a way that it is most desirable, so the way that we can actually target and like follow up with folks. So if we know that a community is affected by something, we can target it, and then we can look at who's engaging, and we can say, okay, how do we fill that gap? Maybe our assumptions are wrong, maybe we need to learn, or maybe we need to fill that gap through additional strategies that might be more relevant to those communities. And we're a software company, so that makes us sort of think on the side of technology, but we really believe in the idea that there are certain groups where a face-to-face meeting or a community event might be the best way to go, but making sure that you're able to sort of document that, understand it is what's critical, so that your process becomes complete and holistic. People begin to feel like they have more ownership in the process when they can sort of begin to see the results in real time, or they can talk to each other, or they can see that you responded to them. It feels more relevant to their day-to-day. Technology is great in that it lets us sort of go to places we haven't necessarily been able to go before. And so we know that a good portion of the country now has smartphones, but not only are smartphones really cool in that way, because we have this incredible dominance of smartphones, 77%, but there are massive numbers of folks who are in low-income communities. 31% of low-income families, their main access to the internet is on their smartphone. Building your process around this notion of accessibility and access is really critical. TJ, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. So for those of you who are in the parks and recreation field, it'll come as no surprise that dog parks are a pretty big issue these days. The Trust for Public Land puts out data all the time, kind of reporting on, trends across the country, and we're seeing all over the place that dog parks are one of the fastest growing public park facilities. A lot more cities are kind of taking this citywide approach to putting together a strategic plan just for dog parks to figure out how to address it. And that's the situation that Raleigh was in. It had been kind of a hot button issue around here for a couple of years. We had a few really controversial projects where we were working on individual neighborhood parks, and through the master plan process kind of proposed to have a dog park at a few of these locations. And approaching it that way, kind of one park at a time, I think led to us getting kind of an unrealistic picture of how the community actually perceived dog parks. So on the one hand, we would just kind of hear a lot of nebulous demand for more dog parks, but then it seemed like every time we tried to do an individual one, that's where a lot of opposition came out. Dog parks are one of those polarizing issues where for some people, dog parks are their favorite thing about the public park system, or honestly, the only reason they ever visit a public park is to use the dog park. And for others, they hate the idea of dogs in parks. And so that situation, dealing with it one neighborhood park at a time, really skewed the feedback that we were getting. So what the dog park study allowed us to do was zoom out, look at this one issue from a city-wide, kind of a park system-wide perspective. And we really wanted to do everything we could to get as broad of an array of feedback as we could. We didn't want to just get the most highly motivated people, the people who kind of always come out and contribute their opinions. We really wanted to make sure we were making it as easy as possible, as accessible as possible. Some of the stats on this slide here show, I think what's a pretty common phenomenon across cities, especially fast-growing mid-sized cities in the U.S. Some of the specific things that we did with the public input platform. It gave us the opportunity to kind of engage residents in person through special events, through drop-in visits to dog parks. Like you had mentioned, meeting people where they already are, but then also giving that opportunity for more intensive feedback online. So we used a wide array of approaches, really tried to triangulate our methodologies in this one. Some of the main things we did was we tried to, have it event-based. First of all, we did a series of pop-up dog parks where we'd put up temporary fencing, invite people to come out, and at those events engage them, and then would also just stop by our dog parks on, a nice weekend afternoon. And honestly, we started out doing this, just going kind of around with iPads, having people fill out the surveys in person with us. What we transitioned to afterward was, we were able to get set up with a pretty simple URL. It was just publicinput.com/dogparks. And what that gave us the opportunity to do was to print out just little business cards, little postcards with the URL on them, a quick description of the study that we were doing, and just kind of handed those out at the dog park or at our events. And the response rate that we got through that method was fantastic. The business card, the postcard approach, just handing those out with the URL, worked much better than even going around person to person with iPads. And obviously it was much cheaper, much less labor intensive, didn't take up staff time, really worked out well because people had this one centralized portal that they could go to provide their feedback. In addition to that, we were able to use kind of the results that we gathered. We were able to check in about halfway through the process, since everybody who participated through publicinput.com, we knew geographically where they lived, where they were taking the survey from. And we actually found a pretty skewed result that a lot of the people who were participating came from kind of the downtown area and up in northern Raleigh. And some of the populations in South and Southeast Raleigh, where we don't have dog parks currently, where it's very different demographic profile, we weren't getting the representation from them. And so we were able to use some geographically targeted social media advertising specifically to reach out to those neighborhoods and those communities. And by the end of the process, that gave us a much more kind of representative citywide perspective on the dog park issue. Another thing that worked out really great for us, with the variety of question types that were available and kind of the online message board engagement, we were a little tentative about it at first. And like I said, it's a polarizing issue. People have very, very strong opinions on both sides of the spectrum, for and against dog parks. And so we were a little bit concerned, but decided, no, let's give it a chance. Let's have an open dialogue about it, and kind of see what comes through. And really, we had no issues at all. There were certainly disagreements on the message boards. We have some very particular questions about how dog parks should fit in with the rest of our public park system. And, this touches on everything from funding to proximity to playgrounds to violations of leash ordinances. It honestly ended up being a really, really productive way to get a broad spectrum of opinions, but at the same time, we were sure to make it easy and accessible enough that we got the numbers of participants we needed to really get a good sense of, who was a very loud minority and who was a more passive but still opinionated majority. Where you can see we ended up with over 4,000 people participating, over 1,200, actually filled out the full survey. And this result for us, we will do planning where we're lucky to get a couple hundred people at the most. So this kind of cross methodological outreach where we did in-person engagement, online engagement, and the ability to follow up in particular with people kind of once they had gone through a first round. For us to follow up with them as the survey went on, we added new questions, and it really became kind of a living homepage. And then at the end of the process, that gave our Parks Advisory Board and our City Council a place where they could go, and it wasn't just the data that we presented at the very end, but they could also go and get a real qualitative sense of the conversation, the community conversation that took place. So we were really pleased with how it came out.
Thank you, CJ, for sharing. This process was so successful that they ended up being highlighted in Parks and Recreation magazine. And Samantha actually did have a question here. She asks, did you have to deal with any trolls? And how did you or the software deal with that?
Nobody that seemed like they were trolling intentionally. We didn't really have anybody abusing the site, posting, kind of multiple comments or aggressive comments or anything like that. I'm aware though that the site also has some sentiment analysis, and I believe you guys can automatically flag, comments that contain profanity or aggressive language, that sort of thing. To my knowledge, I think we actually didn't have to screen out anything. So that really was, something that we were worried about going into it. But we were confident that the platform had functionality in place to address it if it did come up. And I think we were pleasantly surprised to see that it really just didn't become an issue at all. And we were kind of, concerned over something that was a non-issue in the end.
And that lines up. We find that when we have a focused topic like this, folks kind of stay on the right page. This one, we've had other designs that had thousands of comments, and the number they get flagged by Google. Google's perspective is what it's called. It actually will coach people to be nicer and then hide the comments if it feels like it's inappropriate, but we tend to not necessarily see that very often. Samantha had a second question, and I actually have a third too. Samantha asked, do you differentiate between data from people located right next door to a park versus the public at large?
Yeah, we did. That was one of the great things too about kind of dealing with the survey data on the back end, is because everything was geo-referenced. We could use either kind of the functionality that was built in right there in the platform, where you can see the distribution of where people were coming from who participated in the survey. But we're also able to export that data with kind of like latitude and longitude points, and really dove in, and we're able to slice and dice that, in through GIS to really look at all sorts of different things. And yeah, we were able to look at people who live near dog parks and not. And honestly, there was no strong correlation there one way or another. It didn't really affect the overall sentiment, whether you were looking at the citywide perspective or people who live near versus not near dog parks. We also did it for kind of different areas around the city, and that helped us zoom in on, so we'll do our own geospatial analysis based on park service areas and how far people have to travel, and look at population density and kind of make our best guess at where we think a dog park would be appreciated. But then we're also able to just isolate the survey responses and kind of look geographically at who supported dog parks and where they lived, and found that actually lined up really well with what we were thinking. But it was great to be able to do that and kind of see how that sentiment changes around the city. And yeah, being able to, like I said, use the data that was already geo-referenced to do that was super helpful.
And the follow-up question that Samantha asked on that one was, did you ask the public any questions related where they wanted new dog parks or other features, and how are they collected? So
yeah, right in the center there, we kind of have a map. And this is one of our survey questions was, where does Raleigh most need a new dog park? And this was another thing with the platform that it enabled us to do this kind of interactive mapping. And so for us, we kind of drew polygons. The areas on this map represent our CAC districts, which are our citizen advisory councils. Another city might use city council districts or just any other way of dividing up the city geographically. What people were able to do is actually just click on the area, the shape or the color of the area that they thought the city most needed a new dog park. And so that was much, much easier than kind of giving people a multiple choice question where we either use the name of a neighborhood or try to like describe a district of the city, but people call it different things. This really gave us the chance where it was just a map and they're clicking on an area. It's a simple click. They know exactly what they're doing. And yeah, that made it really easy for us to get that kind of answer of, yeah, where do they want to see a new dog park?
Thanks for your question, Samantha. We have a question from an anonymous attendee. Did the platform save you staff time or resources, or was it mostly used to augment your engagement efforts without an eye to cost savings?
So, it did take staff resources in terms of, we like we would with any survey, we kind of work internally. Our standard process is to work with our marketing division on kind of survey design, how we're phrasing the questions, that sort of thing, just to make sure, it's accessible to a wide audience. We're not using too much technical jargon. We're kind of adhering to all of our city standards. But the publicinput.com group was also very helpful, through consultation, being able to tweak questions, make sure that the platform was functioning correctly. If we ever had trouble kind of on the front end, like the admin side, getting things set up, we didn't spend any more time doing it other than kind of like a little bit of an initial learning curve that just comes along with learning any new platform. Before this, we were using SurveyMonkey for most of our outreach. And, we didn't spend any more time on this than we would have doing that. But I think at the end of the day, we got, definitely a lot more functionality, especially when it comes to the message boards and, being able to use kind of one project landing page, especially when it's got, a snappy URL that's easy for people to remember, is a lot easier than asking them to navigate our cityofraleigh.gov website, which can be, a little bit more cumbersome, not quite as user-friendly as this platform turned out to be.
And then there's a question that asks, does the program have a way to apply survey weights? Those survey weights, if we need to weight answers and responses, the platform can do that. And if we need to weight things based on demographics, it can do that as well.
Yeah, we didn't do that particularly with the dog park study, but yeah, that is good functionality to know about.
Samantha asked, what do the compiled comments look like and how can they be ordered or categorized in different ways?
We kind of presented it two different ways. One, like I said, is we maintain the homepage, like the publicinput.com/dogparks, is kind of like a living document where people could go visit the site even after the formal survey had closed, and still go back through and look at all of the message board comments and people's responses to questions and view the survey results and kind of interact with them that way, and let the conversation continue. But we also went through and were able to, for example, one of our questions was like, which dog park amenities are a highest priority to you? Trying to decide if when we're designing future spaces, do we want to prioritize with limited funding available, shade, seating, water access, agility equipment, mulch versus some other type of surface, and really trying to figure out, okay, what is, the most important? In some ways, we were able to do that where people could kind of rank among amenities, but we were also able to kind of ask it as an open-ended question and then go back through and code their responses depending on how they answered. And so that was one way that we were able to sort through the actual comments themselves, was by going through and coding those comments, kind of turning that qualitative data into a more quantitative data that we could then, evaluate that way.
Yeah, and that coding is integrated in, just a small piece there. I have an Esposita said, kudos to Raleigh for embracing data-driven decision-making. Hopefully this is trending up to local government. What were some of the barriers you encountered between staff resources, executive level willingness to change, technological struggles with departments, et cetera? And how are you able to convince leadership to embrace this way of doing business?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think we're doing this at a good time for the city. There's a lot of attention from our city manager's office about taking a more data-driven approach, a more quantitative approach. Every department now kind of has a set of quantitative performance measures that we report on every quarter, every 6 months, around some different, key initiatives that are in our city's strategic plan. In terms of cultural shift, I think that it's just a good time with the city of Raleigh to be doing that. I can say over the, 4 or 5 years ago, when I think this kind of thing was really, we were first dipping our toes in it a little bit more. We had a lot of luck presenting a few projects where we use this data-driven approach, because it helped to kind of insulate things a little bit more from the more political process. That's always going to be a part of it. But when we started using data and especially visually attractive data, like the way you present it is so important to getting people on board, especially people who aren't used to dealing with this sort of thing on a day-to-day basis. Maybe it's a city council member, maybe it's the director of a department, people who are more used to dealing in anecdotes and, direct feedback and responding to kind of individual complaints. Being able to present the data in a visually captivating way, I think went a very long way to convincing some of those people who it's not second nature to them to kind of get on board with the approach. And I think ultimately when the data supported good planning and things that we knew were good planning decisions, I think that helped with the messaging where, we were able to fall back on and say, look, this isn't just feedback that we've gotten from 8 or 12 people who came to a community meeting. This is quantitative feedback that we've gotten from thousands of people. I think that helps those arguments go a much longer way. But yeah, the general conversation around, data-driven decision-making, it's tough, and it is an adjustment for a lot of people. And that's why, again, I think plopping a spreadsheet down on somebody's desk doesn't necessarily do as much as, picking out a few key pieces of information and making sure that they're it's visualized very well, very clearly. Being able to present it that way, I think really helps kind of bridge that gap, make that data-driven approach more palatable.
Well, thank you, TJ, and thanks to you all for the questions. That was a great conversation. I think TJ mentioned quite a bit that they wanted to get beyond those initial group of people who wanted to participate. So in order to do that, they had to lower their barriers to participation through these new tools, but also going to where the public was at dog parks and hot days with lots of dogs running around. And then, beginning to really capture all that and analyze that in the data, and then, like TJ was saying, making it visually appealing. Closing the loop was really critical, and this was a really fun project because I don't think TJ mentioned it, but what they did after they did that initial 1,200-person survey was they emailed all the people who'd given them email addresses during that process with a couple points of clarity. I think they got about 400 people to re-engage on that second engagement, and it was really just, here's a couple things that emerged that we still need further clarification on. And so they were able to close the loop, not only by having the site out there in a way that was dynamic and folks could go through and to read about that, essentially be able to verify some of the preferences they thought they were hearing from the group with that second engagement. So they were able to re-engage throughout.
I'll jump in to add, both doing that follow-up was very, very helpful, exactly like you mentioned. And it also gave us the opportunity, I know one of the final questions that we had on the survey was, whether or not people were interested in either donating or volunteering or joining a stewardship group, to help maintain our dog parks. And, potentially when we build a new one, to kind of have a group already assembled, kind of like a Friends of the Dog Park group. Yeah, that was super easy to build right into the survey and already have all that contact info in place. And so that's given us a pool of a couple hundred people who honestly were looking for ways to volunteer and were already interested, but kind of didn't know how to communicate that with us. Through this process, we were able to also, beyond just getting the survey questions answered, build up that pool of support, which now is going to help us, going on into the future.
And then ultimately the goal here, which is always sort of the goal of all these processes, is that it continues to deepen the trust in the community. This process was praised by council for its transparency and its ability to bring all of the opinions to the table and have a real clear understanding of what folks' preferences were throughout the process. And so it's pretty fantastic. I'm just going to show you a couple other projects that are similar to this and just things to take away from today in terms of the way that as you're going through and you're working on projects, one simple question is a great way to start. being really relevant around one question. Sometimes my background personally is in planning. We like to ask really long surveys with lots of questions. Both in the dog park survey and others, we've worked with our partners to simplify that, make it more accessible, and sort of think of it as a multi-step process as opposed to one deal. But a great way to start with this is really just think of the question you need answered most and use that as a launching point. In this case, this is an example of a bike survey that City of Raleigh did a few years ago, and they put a post on Facebook for people that rode bikes or had bike interest, asking what roads need bike improvements. And people responded and engaged with that because it was directly related to them when they thought of it. And they got a whole different set of folks and a whole different set of streets when they changed the post to Spanish. Another example, this is in Austin. For a while, it looked like Austin was going to steal Columbus, Ohio's soccer team. They instead got their own soccer team, I think is what ended up happening. And so immediately the city needed to go online and ask for public feedback on that. It was incredible the amount of feedback that they received, and they wanted to show that there was that the interest, if it existed across the entire city. And they also wanted to make sure that participants were actually in Austin, because this move was also sort of relevant to people in Columbus, Ohio at that point. They were able to put this out there, ask questions. They showed a lot of interest. They were able to generate a lot of interest on the page and help council there make a decision about moving forward with this plan. They also showed that of the over 1,000 people that participated in this project, that only 16 came from Columbus. And they were not very much in favor of it, but otherwise they showed pretty strong interest. And so this is an example of one where it's a hot button issue. It's something that potentially you'd have concerns about putting out there, but they got really great feedback, really because we got so much participation. And it sort of is that graph where after we get past the first few very excitable folks, things kind of even out and you can get some really great feedback that way. In Virginia Beach, they've been working with a lot of just reactive stuff. So they had a event in downtown where it's all college kids come to the beach once a year, and they were able to go and collect sort of responses and Facebook traffic that they saw going on. So they didn't necessarily put a survey out or that type of engagement out, but they looked at Facebook chatter, the next door chatter about this event, and then they were able to catalog that using technology, because that's a place where technology can help us too, is to catalog those types of things. So it's a relevant topic that exists, and then they were able to go in and start looking at that. Virginia Beach reacted to the hurricane as well, and they asked, where did you find flooding? That stuff is right on people's minds. The ultimate goal is that for the first time, which you can actually begin to see, are your participation numbers, are the information that you don't necessarily have access to, and then be able to react to that, much as they did in Raleigh when they saw, oh, we've gotten all this engagement, it's fantastic. We're missing Southeast Raleigh. How do we strategize to meet that need down there? So essentially, it's really about developing a process, getting this information, and finally having really performance data for your pieces here. So I saw a question come in, and Ken asks, I think this is more a question for you, TJ. How are you able to show a return on investment for council, CM, and I think in your case, maybe even department leadership? How do you tell the story and prove that the money is worth the return?
Yeah, I think it's a great question and totally relevant. We like I said, we work with our marketing department to decide which of these platforms we might use. We've tried out others in the past, My Sidewalk and Mind Mixer, some other platforms like that. Ultimately, I think the proof was in some of the response rates that we've gotten. So we've gone on, the dog park study was kind of the initial project that we tested this platform out through, but we're now using it for other individual park master plans. We've got 2 ongoing right now. We've got another kind of citywide project, or at least it's not a site-specific one. It's a Neuse River Blueway plan, where we're looking at the Neuse River is the largest river that runs through Raleigh. We're developing a series of kind of kayak and canoe launches up and down the river. I want to get feedback on that. And so these are just a kind of a good cross-section of projects that, some are site-specific, some are more geographically spread out. And we've just already seen the response rate that we've gotten just be so much higher than we're used to seeing. You know, the quality of the data and the quality of the responses, I think goes a very long way. But if, you know, you got to make kind of a one sentence argument, it's just in the numbers in terms of the number of people who are engaging with us. And, you know, this isn't just a platform that's used by our parks department. I know that our planning department is doing the same thing, transportation. You saw some of the bike Raleigh stuff, and everybody's kind of had the same experience, just that the number of people that are engaged are much higher, and that's the easiest one to communicate. And then our project managers know, the people who actually deal with the survey responses and work with the data that we get out of it, the quality of that information is also much higher and much more dynamic than we were getting from some of the other platforms we had tried out.
And the only thing I'll add is that, you know, our philosophy is that you can support everything with this platform. And so what I mean by that is, when you have something like this, you should want it to support. And I think what we're working on with Parks is getting from sort of this sense that it is only going to be something we use for the dog park study, the big thing, to moving to a place where we can use it for playgrounds. So they have a playground upgrade plan every year. There's a series of playgrounds that they go through a whole process on. And those are smaller, but the ability to support all those different processes, I think is the secondary piece there. One, as you begin to get beyond the big projects, you're really sort of building trust with each of those things, because a lot of people that maybe they won't get involved probably in much until it's their neighborhood park that's having a playground renovation, and now all of a sudden they're really engaged. We want to sort of create that for you. So it's sort of continuing. It's sort of that whole continuum.
Yeah, one piece I'll actually add, when it comes to who we are reaching, a lot of our kind of traditional methods relied on people who are already subscribed to our listserv, or who had kind of registered with our programs at community centers or at parks, or, you know, through our recreation leagues, things like that. And those are the people that we would kind of remarket to. But a lot of the functionality here, especially with helping us with kind of like that geographically targeted advertising and social media outreach, has really helped us reach a whole, you know, kind of new cross section of people who weren't already engaged with our programs and with our services. And so we've actually seen that through a couple of the master plan surveys that we've done, where we've asked, you know, kind of, have you visited parks before? Have you registered with our programs before? And we found that like a lot of the people who are engaging through public input are people that we would have missed just kind of doing it by our traditional methods, like I said, using newsletter subscribers and the people who are already plugged into City of Raleigh Twitter, those like official outlets. This definitely gave us another angle to reach some people that we weren't reaching before.